The night was still, the kind of eerie silence that makes every sound feel louder, every movement sharper, every shadow heavier. And right there in the middle of that quiet suburban cul-de-sac stood the last person anyone expected to see at midnight, Hoko. Karen, her face twisted with determination, her oversized sunglasses absurdly perched on her head even though the street lamps were the only light source, her hand clutching a massive pair of bolt cutters that glinted under the yellow glow. She crouched low by the chain and lock wrapped across the black Jeep's tires, her jaw tight as she muttered to herself about eyesores and rules being rules. And then, with one hard crunch, the lock snapped in two, echoing so loudly. It almost sounded like a gunshot, making her flinch before her lips curled into a triumphant grin as she whispered, "Finally." Victory. But before that grin could even settle on her smug face, a sound rolled through the neighborhood like thunder police sirens growing louder, closer, sharper until red and blue lights splashed across the neatly trimmed lawns and beige walls of every HOA-approved house. Karen froze, bolt cutters still in her hands, her face shifting from glee to confusion, then to a flicker of panic as neighbors' blinds cracked open and silhouettes appeared at windows, phones raised to record because everyone knew what was about to happen, and the drama was far too delicious to miss. The Jeep sat there gleaming in the night, black paint absorbing the siren glow like a predator in the shadows. But to Karen, it was nothing more than a trophy, her conquest over what she thought was an arrogant neighbor who refused to bow to her HOA authority. She tossed her hair back, forcing her smile to stay, her voice dripping with entitlement as she muttered loudly enough for the shadows to hear, "Finally, this junk will be gone, and this neighborhood will be respectable again." But her words faltered when the flashing lights grew brighter, washing over her face until every wrinkle of stress and arrogance was on display. The sirens cut suddenly, leaving only the crunch of heavy tires as a pair of unmarked black SUVs and a police cruiser rolled to a stop. The quiet deepened again, heavier than before, the kind of silence that squeezes the air out of your chest. And Karen, still gripping those bolt cutters, turned her head slowly, that frozen smile cracking as uniformed officers stepped out with tactical vests shining in the streetlight, their hands hovering near their holsters as one barked, "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." Her voice cracked but carried its usual venom as she shrieked back, "You can't tell me what to do. This is my neighborhood. I am on the HOA board. That Jeep is violating Code 14 Section B." She jabbed a finger toward the Jeep, her bolt cutters swinging wildly in her other hand, and the sight would have been comical if it weren't so dangerous. This suburban tyrant trying to stand her ground against flashing lights and authority she didn't understand. The officers exchanged quick glances, their movement steady, controlled, professional, as another voice rang out, deeper, calmer, with the weight of someone who didn't need to raise it to command attention. "Ma'am, that Jeep doesn't belong to you. And it doesn't belong to the HOA either." Karen's eyes darted from one uniform to another, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. But before she could unleash another tirade, a new figure stepped into the siren-washed scene, the man she hated most in this neighborhood. The man she had been plotting against for weeks. I stood there in the shadows of the cruiser lights, calm, steady, watching her unravel like a bad play in front of an audience that had paid for front row seats. My voice cut through her chaos, measured and almost amused as I said, "I warned you, Karen. I told you not to touch that Jeep." Her face drained of color, her bolt cutters slipping slightly in her grip, her bravado cracking under the weight of something she didn't yet know but was about to learn in the hardest way possible. I took a step closer, eyes locked on hers, and my words came slow, deliberate, like the opening lines of a movie trailer. "That Jeep isn't just mine. It belongs to a police task force." The silence that followed was louder than the sirens. Had been heavy with disbelief, with fear, with the sting of realization sinking into her veins. Neighbors gasped, phones trembled as they recorded, whispers rippled like a wave across lawns. Task force? Did she just try to steal from the police? Oh, she's done. Karen staggered back a step, her defiance slipping like sand through her fingers, her eyes wide as she stammered, "Wow, what do you mean, police task force?" But the officers didn't bother answering, they didn't need to. The flashing lights said it all. The authority in their stance made it clear, and the weight of the law pressed down on her like a tidal wave. Right there. In that frozen moment, the story of her downfall began not with a bang, not with a court order or a fine, but with the clatter of broken metal at her feet and the realization that her HOA power meant nothing compared to the law. Her smug grin was gone, her arrogance crumbled, and all that remained was the sharp inhale of panic as she realized she had just crossed a line she could never uncross, and that's when the frame froze, her face lit by flashing red and blue. Her mouth opened mid-gasp, bolt cutters dangling uselessly at her side, while my voice rolled over the scene like a narrator pulling you deeper into the story. She thought she was stealing my Jeep. What she didn't know, it wasn't just mine, it belonged to a police task force. The words lingered over the frozen image, bold text slamming across the screen with impact as the music swelled. A dramatic pause, then my voice softened, teasing, inviting, and if you think that's where the story ends, you're dead wrong. Stick around, because this HOA war is just getting started. The frame unfroze into a call to action card, the glowing subscribe button pulsing with urgency, as the audience was left hanging on the edge of curiosity, desperate to see just how badly Karen's arrogance was about to backfire. The sirens, the shouting, the shock on Karen's face, it all made for one hell of an opening act. But to understand how we got there, how a neighborhood squabble spiraled into a showdown with bolt cutters and flashing lights, you have to rewind. You have
to know who I am and why that black
Jeep sitting in my driveway wasn't just another unapproved vehicle, according to some HOA handbook. My name's Daniel. I'm a former police officer who spent nearly 2 decades chasing down everything from drug runners on the interstate to fraudsters who thought a suit and tie could hide their crimes, and when I retired, I swore I was done with the noise, the danger, the endless battles with people who thought they were above the law. But the funny thing about life is, trouble doesn't just disappear when you hang up your badge. Sometimes it finds you in the most unexpected places. Even in a quiet little neighborhood with manicured lawns, picket fences, and a homeowners association that thought their rules carried more weight than state law, I'd moved there for peace, for a slower rhythm, for the kind of mornings where the loudest sound was a lawnmower 2 streets over, but old ties don't just vanish. And before long, I was tapped by some of my former colleagues for a task force operation not undercover in the usual sense, not busting down doors or running wiretaps, but providing logistical support, a safe house, a quiet place where surveillance equipment could be staged without drawing attention. And at the center of that operation was my Jeep, an unassuming black beast that looked like a weekend toy to the untrained eye, but was officially tied, documented, and registered under state police jurisdiction. That Jeep wasn't just metal and rubber, it was an asset, one piece in a larger puzzle, and tampering with it was no different than tampering with a squad car or police van. Of course, none of that mattered to Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the kind of neighbor who acted like the sidewalks were her private kingdom and the bylaws were holy scripture. She had a knack for sniffing out the smallest details. Grass half an inch too long, a trash can left at the curb for 30 minutes past collection, Christmas lights taken down a day later than the deadline. She strutted through the neighborhood in pastel blouses and wedge sandals, clutching a clipboard like it was a scepter, and with every step she radiated this smug superiority that made my teeth clench. It didn't take long before she set her sights on me, the new guy, the one who didn't bow to her authority. And when her eyes landed on the Jeep parked in my driveway, I could practically hear the gears in her head grinding. An unapproved vehicle, a violation. Leverage. It started with notes, passive-aggressive slips of paper tucked under the wipers. Reminder: only approved vehicles may be parked overnight in driveways. Then came the emails, paragraphs of citations pulled from the HOA rulebook, complete with bold red highlights like she was a prosecutor presenting evidence. I ignored most of it, not out of disrespect, but because I knew something she didn't. The Jeep wasn't under her jurisdiction. It was under the state's. I even told her once, calmly, casually, as we crossed paths by the mailbox, "Karen, don't worry about the Jeep. It's official police property, not something the HOA needs to get involved with." Her laugh, shrill, mocking, still echoes in my ears as she snapped back, "Police property? Don't be ridiculous. Around here, I decide what belongs and what doesn't." That was Karen in a nutshell, so blinded by her imagined power that the actual law meant nothing to her. Word spread fast, as it always does in tight-knit neighborhoods. Soon enough, whispers floated across backyard fences and over coffee cups at morning walks. Karen's after the Jeep. Some neighbors rolled their eyes, others encouraged her. But the tension was growing, and I could feel the lines being drawn. For me, it wasn't just about a vehicle, it was about principle. About protecting something tied to a larger mission, something that if compromised could jeopardize an entire task force operation. For her, it was about control, about proving that no one, not even a retired cop with friends in high places, could ignore the almighty HOA. Every encounter became a chess move. She'd send a warning, I'd respond with patience. She'd call a meeting, I'd show up with documentation. She'd raise her voice, I'd stay calm. But beneath that calm, a storm was brewing, because I knew Karen's type: people who pushed and pushed until they thought they'd won, people who couldn't imagine losing because they were too drunk on their own authority. I'd faced gang leaders with the same arrogance, white-collar criminals with the same smug grin, and I knew how the story always ended, with consequences they never saw coming. The stakes weren't just about a Jeep. Not to me, not anymore. It was about my reputation in this neighborhood, about my freedom to live without a woman peering over her hedge and scribbling notes every time I breathed wrong. It was about respect, something Karen had no intention of giving but every intention of demanding. And so the board was set, the players locked in, me, trying to protect not only my peace but a piece of police property tied to an active operation, and her, the self-anointed monarch of the cul-de-sac, convinced that cutting a lock and hauling away a Jeep would be her crowning victory. Little did she know, the game she thought she was playing was way above her league. If Chapter 2 was the calm before the storm, then Chapter 3 was when the clouds gathered, the wind shifted, and the neighborhood began buzzing like a hive about to swarm. Because that was when Karen launched her full assault, her crusade against my Jeep. It began with the letters, typed on HOA letterhead, delivered with an almost military precision. The first one appeared in my mailbox early on a Monday morning. Crisp white paper with black bold font screaming at me, "Remove that unauthorized vehicle immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines." I held it in my hand, smirking at the absurdity, because what Karen didn't know or refused to believe was that she wasn't just ordering me to move a Jeep. She was trying to muscle her way into a fight with the state police. I thought ignoring it might send a message, but Karen wasn't the type to back down. By Wednesday, there was another letter, longer, more aggressive. "This vehicle is not registered with the HOA and violates community standards. You have 72 hours to remove it." And by Friday, she had escalated to color photographs snapped. From across the street, up close on my driveway, even one where she'd leaned over my hedge like a paparazzi staking out a celebrity. Each photo came with arrows and circles like she was building a legal case. See the mud splatter? See the unapproved modifications? She was obsessed, and the neighborhood could feel it. Soon enough, whispers drifted like smoke through the cul-de-sac. At the community park, I overheard Mrs. Davidson muttering, "Karen says that Jeep is illegal, you know," while another neighbor countered, "But I heard it's police property. You can't just tow that." At the mailbox cluster, two dads lingered, one shaking his head. "She's gonna get herself in trouble." "He's calm, too calm, that's always a bad sign." Some sided with her, tired of her gossip but afraid of her wrath, while others defended me quietly, sending nods of encouragement or quick murmurs like, "Don't let her push you around." It was a cold war fought with rumors and side glances, and at the center of it all sat my Jeep, gleaming in the driveway like a soldier standing watch. Karen, of course, wasn't satisfied with whispers. She thrived on confrontation. She began patrolling past my house more frequently, her phone raised like a weapon as she snapped photo after photo. Her lips pursed so tight they disappeared into a single angry line. One afternoon, I stepped outside just as she crouched low by the front tire, angling her phone like she was documenting evidence for a crime scene. "Karen," I said evenly, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" She jumped, startled, then quickly covered her shock with that all-too-familiar smirk. "Documenting violations," she snapped, her tone sharp and theatrical. "Because if you don't remove this eyesore, the board will. We'll tow it. And you'll be paying fines stacked higher than that junk heap." I let the silence hang. For a moment, studying her the way I used to study suspects' body language, stiff, eyes darting, desperate to assert control but betraying fear under the surface. Then I spoke, calm but firm, every word measured like a chess move. "Karen, this Jeep isn't just a car. It's active police property. You touch it, you break federal law." Her laugh was loud, shrill, echoing across the cul-de-sac as if she wanted the whole street to hear. "Police property? Don't make me laugh. That's your excuse because you think you're above the rules. Newsflash, you're not. Around here, HOA rules are the law." Her words carried, and blinds shifted in nearby houses as neighbors tuned. In waiting for my reply, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply stepped closer, lowering mine so she had to lean in to catch it. Karen, I've dealt with gang leaders, fraudsters, and felons who all thought the same thing, that their rules mattered more than the law. And every one of them learned the hard way that they were wrong. Don't make their mistake. The smirk faltered for half a second, just long enough for me to see the crack in her armor, but then she straightened, chin lifted like a queen at her throne. We'll see about that, she hissed, spinning on her heel and storming off, her phone still raised as she snapped one final picture over her shoulder. From that moment on, the harassment escalated like clockwork. The letters doubled, then tripled. Threats of fines turned into bold, underlined warnings of forcible removal. Karen began cornering other neighbors, lecturing them about how the Jeep lowered property values and brought down this neighborhood image. At one point, I caught her gesturing wildly in the park, waving a copy of the HOA rulebook as she told a cluster of uneasy residents, "If he gets away with this, none of us are safe." Next thing you know, we'll have broken down trucks and motorcycles everywhere. The irony, of course, was that the Jeep wasn't broken down, it was in pristine condition, cleaner than half the HOA board's cars, but in her narrative, perception was everything got, and yet, through it all, I kept calm. I kept my head down, answered only when necessary, never losing my temper, because I knew what she didn't. Every letter she sent, every photo she snapped, every threat she made it, was all building a paper trail. A file that, when the time came, would speak louder than her shrieks. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting the Jeep, protecting the task force operation that relied on its presence, protecting the principle that no HOA bully could rise above the law. The tension became the pulse of the neighborhood. Every barbecue, every morning walk, every mailbox stop became a stage for the ongoing drama, neighbors whispering like gossip columnists, taking bets on who would win. And as Karen grew bolder, more desperate, more convinced of her absolute authority, I could see the storm brewing. Behind her eyes, she was planning something bigger, something reckless, something that would take her beyond letters and photos and into territory she couldn't walk back from. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I was just another neighbor she could bully into submission. She thought her HOA handbook was more powerful than state law. She had no idea how wrong she was. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to choke on, every lawn chair and folding table under the community gazebo buzzing with nervous whispers as residents gathered to watch Karen do what she loved most, hold court like a tyrant with a gavel. She strutted to the front in a pastel blazer, lips pursed, eyes glittering with that hungry satisfaction of someone who believed tonight she would cement her power. She dropped a neat stack of papers on the table with a dramatic thud, adjusted her glasses like a judge preparing to pass sentence, and banged the gavel 3 sharp times that echoed across the park. "Order! Order!" she screeched, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "We are here to discuss repeated violations that threaten the image, value, and harmony of this community. And at the top of that list is one glaring eyesore, a black Jeep parked at number 12 Oak Ridge Drive." Gasps and murmurs rolled through the crowd like ripples in water. I sat back in my chair, arms crossed, expression calm, letting her rant, because I knew every word was another rope she was tying around her own neck. Karen waved her arms like a conductor in front of an orchestra, spinning her story with wild exaggeration. "This vehicle is unauthorized, it is unsightly, it violates Section 14B, and I've received complaints from multiple neighbors who feel unsafe with it parked here." She slammed down a stack of photographs of my Jeep from every angle, zoomed in like crime scene evidence. "Look at this. Mud on the tires, non-standard modifications. Do we look like a junkyard? No, we are a community of class, and this junk heap drags us all down." Her eyes darted around, daring anyone to oppose her, but most residents stayed quiet, exchanging nervous glances, unwilling to be the next target of her wrath. I leaned forward, finally breaking my silence, my voice calm but carrying enough weight to cut through the noise. "Karen, I've told you before. That Jeep is not just my personal property, it's state police property. Active task force equipment. You don't have the authority to order it removed, and you certainly don't have the authority to tamper with it." A hush fell for a moment, some neighbors shifting uncomfortably, others widening their eyes at the word police, but Karen's face twisted into a mocking sneer. She cut me off mid-sentence, slamming the gavel again. "Rules are rules," she shouted, her voice shrill and triumphant, as if sheer volume could erase the truth. I don't care what stories you spin about police work. Around here, the HOA decides what stays and what goes. And your Jeep goes. The words rang out like a verdict, her voice shaking with a mix of arrogance and desperation. A few timid claps came from her loyalists in the front row, but most of the crowd stayed silent, caught between disbelief and dread. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to explode, to lash out, to meet Karen's fire with fire, but that wasn't who I was. Instead, I stood slowly, letting the chair scrape against the pavement, and spoke evenly, almost softly, forcing everyone to lean in. Karen, if you keep pushing this, if you take one more step toward that Jeep, you won't just be breaking HOA rules, you'll be breaking federal law. And when that happens, there won't be any gavel you can bang to save you. Her face twitched, the mask of control cracking for the briefest moment, but then she plastered on her smug smile again, defiance radiating off her like heat. We'll see, she snapped, dismissing me with a flick of her hand like I was some nuisance buzzing in her ear. She banged the gavel again and moved on to landscaping budgets, but the damage was done. The meeting broke up soon after, residents filing out in awkward silence, some whispering to me with quiet support, "Don't let her get to you." Others avoiding my gaze, afraid of being dragged into the storm. Karen, though, strutted away, with her clipboard clutched tight, whispering conspiratorially to her allies, her eyes burning with the kind of reckless determination that comes when arrogance blinds common sense. That night, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, the crickets chirping in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Karen wasn't the type to let things settle. She thrived on escalation, on proving she could bend the world to her will, and I was right. Over the next week, I noticed her circling more often, walking her little white dog past my driveway 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a day, each time her gaze lingering on the Jeep like a predator stalking prey. Twice I caught her slowing down her SUV, rolling to a stop across the street and staring with narrowed eyes, scribbling something on her clipboard. And then came the moment that confirmed what I already knew, late one night, just past 11. I spotted her silhouette in the glow of a street lamp, crouched near my fence, measuring tape in hand, jotting notes, whispering angrily to herself. Karen was planning something bigger than fines or letters or photos. She was done waiting for me to bow. She wanted action, and she wanted it now. In her mind, she was untouchable, the HOA president, shielded by bylaws, adored by her little circle of sycophants. She believed she could cross the line and still walk away victorious. She believed cutting a lock, moving a Jeep, making it disappear, would be her ultimate victory, the crowning moment that proved once and for all she was above me, above the law, above everyone. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that every step she took closer to that Jeep was another step toward her own downfall. Because the one thing I'd learned in all my years as a cop is this: arrogance blinds people, convinces them they're invincible until the moment the lights flash, the sirens scream, and they realize too late just how small they really are. Night was still, the kind of quiet that makes every sound echo sharper than it should, the only movement the sway of branches under a lazy summer breeze. And that's when she emerged, Karen slipping out of her house in a pale tracksuit like some suburban ninja, clutching a pair of bolt cutters that glinted beneath the street lamp. She muttered under her breath as she crept across the cul-de-sac, heels clicking softly against the pavement, her little white dog tugging on the leash before she snapped, "Hush, Biscuit, Mommy has business to handle." Her eyes flicked around, nervously, then hardened with that self-righteous smugness that had carried her this far. And when she reached my driveway, she paused, staring at the heavy lock on the chain like it was her ultimate villain. "Rules are rules," she hissed through clenched teeth, gripping the cutters with both hands. "You think you can ignore me? Not in my neighborhood." The metal groaned as she pressed down, the bolt cutters biting through with a sharp snap. That cracked the silence, and just like that, the lock fell, clattering against the pavement. Karen's face lit up in triumph, a grin spreading wide as she kicked the broken lock aside and swung open the gate like she'd just conquered a fortress. She strutted up to the Jeep, one manicured hand trailing across the hood, whispering to herself like she was savoring victory. "You're done. Say goodbye to your little toy. I'll have this towed, scrapped, gone. Tomorrow everyone will thank me for saving the neighborhood." She tugged at the door, yanked it open, and climbed into the driver's seat with an awkward Shuffle, tossing her bolt cutters onto the passenger side. The interior swallowed her, lights from the dash flickering faintly. The faint smell of oil and leather hitting her nose as she wrapped her hands around the steering wheel, giggling with delight like a child who'd snuck into an amusement ride. But she didn't notice the blinds cracking open across the street, or the glow of phone cameras flicking on one by one. Neighbors peeking out in hushed disbelief, some gasping, some whispering, "She's actually stealing it." Others lifted their phones higher, recording the spectacle they knew was about to explode. Curran leaned back in the seat, adjusting the mirrors as if she truly owned it, muttering, "Oh, this feels good. Finally, order. Finally, peace. No more eyesore." She jammed the gear shift like she expected it to move, scowled when it didn't, then leaned forward to fumble under the dash, still convinced she could somehow drive away with a police task. Forced Jeep she barely understood. That's when it happened. First the low growl of engines in the distance, then the sudden blaze of headlights that cut through the cul-de-sac like a spotlight on a stage. Karen froze, her head snapping toward the end of the street, her grin melting into wide-eyed panic as the glow grew brighter, louder, closer. One by one, unmarked black SUVs rolled in, flanking both sides of the street like shadows closing in, their tires crunching over the pavement. Red and blue lights burst to life, painting the houses in flashing color, sirens wailing. The neighborhood erupting into chaos as doors slammed open and uniformed officers spilled out with weapons at the ready. Karen's jaw dropped, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, breath coming fast as she stammered, What is this?" Neighbors rushed onto porches now, some laughing, some covering their mouths in shock, recording every second as the police surrounded my driveway. One officer raised a megaphone, voice booming across the street. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Karen flinched, fumbling for the bolt cutters like they were some magic key that would undo this disaster, then shoved them under the seat in a panicked attempt to hide the evidence. But the SUV doors slammed, boots pounded the pavement, and the task force moved in formation, weapons low but ready, laser sights dancing across the Jeep's hood. "Last warning," the officer barked. "Exit the vehicle with your hands up." Karen scrambled, her smug mask crumbling into frantic terror, sweat dripping down her forehead as she pushed the door open with trembling hands. "Wait. This isn't what it looks like," she shrieked, stumbling out, her hands raised in a jerky half-surrender, eyes darting from one officer to another. "I'm not stealing it. I'm the HOA president. I'm in charge here." Her voice cracked into hysteria, desperate to reclaim control. But the officers weren't listening to HOA titles or neighborhood rules. They were looking at the broken lock on the pavement, the bolt cutters half hidden on the seat, the obvious signs of forced entry. A neighbor across the street shouted, "She cut the lock." "We all saw it." Another added, "I've got it on video." Phones lit up, recording every second. Karen's humiliation immortalized in 4K. I stepped forward from my porch then, my voice calm but cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Officers, that's her. She broke the lock. She was trying to take the Jeep." All eyes turned toward me, and Karen's head whipped around, her face twisting with betrayal. "You set me up," she screeched, but her words were drowned by the clink of handcuffs as two officers grabbed her arms and forced them behind her back. She kicked, screamed, tried to yank free, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "This is harassment. This is my community. You can't do this to me." But the more she fought, the tighter the cuffs went, the clearer her downfall became, her kingdom of HOA bylaws collapsing in the flood of real law. The neighbors whispered, some laughing openly now, others shaking their heads in disbelief. One man muttered, "I knew she'd go too far one day." Another chuckled, "Guess the rules didn't cover breaking into police property." Karen thrashed as they hauled her toward the SUVs, her voice a broken mix of rage and desperation. "I was protecting property values. I was keeping order. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." But no one believed her anymore. She wasn't the queen of Oak Ridge Drive tonight. She was just another criminal caught in the act, her arrogance finally catching up with her. And as the sirens blared and the convoy of police vehicles prepared to pull away, I couldn't help but glance at the Jeep, sitting steady and untouched, a symbol of the one truth Karen could never accept. In the end, real authority doesn't come from a gavel or a clipboard or a power trip, it comes from the law. And the law had just slammed its door on her once and for all. The night shattered with sirens and command voices. the flashing red and blue lights washing across every window on the cul-de-sac like a storm surge. And Karen stood frozen beside the Jeep, her hands half raised, half defiant, as officers leapt from unmarked SUVs with weapons drawn, voices cutting through the chaos with one unyielding command: step away from the vehicle. Now, the force of it cracked through the humid air like thunder, and neighbors poured onto porches in robes and slippers, phones out, mouths open in disbelief at the scene unfolding in their quiet suburban utopia. Karen screamed back with the shrill authority of someone who'd ruled through fear for too long. "This is my neighborhood. He can't keep this Jeep here. I'm the HOA president. This is against the rules." Her voice carried over the wail of sirens, sharp and desperate, but it sounded suddenly small against the disciplined, deliberate chorus of trained officers. They fanned out in tactical precision, circling her in the Jeep, flashlights cutting across the driveway, beams bouncing off the chrome as one officer raised a hand and barked again, "Step away from the vehicle." Karen stomped her foot, her face blotchy with fury, shrieking like a child denied a toy. "No! This is community property. He doesn't get to flaunt the rules while the rest of us follow them." She jabbed her finger toward me, standing calm at the edge of my porch, my arms folded, my expression unreadable. "Arrest him. He's the problem, not me." But the officers didn't look at me. They didn't even blink in my direction. Instead, one stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, his voice steady as steel. "Ma'am, this vehicle does not belong to him. It does not belong to you. It is official property of the State Police Task Force, and you are interfering with an active operation by attempting to tamper with it." The words hit the street like a bomb. For a beat, no one spoke, no one breathed. Neighbors froze mid-recording. Jaws hanging open, dogs ceased barking. Even the cicadas seemed to go silent. Karen's smug mask cracked instantly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, her eyes wide as the weight of the revelation landed. "No," she stammered, shaking her head violently. "That's impossible. It's just a Jeep, an ugly, old, unauthorized Jeep." "You're lying." Her voice wavered, weak, the power draining out of it with every syllable, but the officer didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. This vehicle is outfitted for law enforcement use. Touching it, tampering with it, breaking into it, that's destruction of state property and obstruction of justice." He gestured toward the broken lock glinting on the asphalt. "And that lock you cut? That's felony evidence right there." The neighborhood gasped in one collective exhale, like the entire street had been holding its breath for this exact moment. A neighbor whispered loudly enough to be heard, "I knew it, he told her not to touch it." And another muttered, "Oh, she's done. She's so done." Karen whipped around, wild-eyed, scanning the crowd as if anyone might step in to defend her, but instead she was met with a sea of cameras pointed straight at her, every neighbor suddenly a documentarian capturing her downfall. She spun back toward the officer, shrieking, "No, you don't understand. I'm in charge here. I'm the president of this HOA. I decide what stays and what goes." Her voice cracked under the strain, desperation bleeding through, but I finally stepped forward. Slow, deliberate, letting the moment hang heavy before I spoke. "I told you not to touch it, Karen," I said evenly, my tone calm, almost pitying, but cutting sharper than any shout. "You thought you were above the law. Turns out the law was sitting in my driveway the whole time." Her face twisted, the color draining, lips trembling as she sputtered, You set me up. You planned this." But her accusation sounded hollow, pitiful, drowned out by the quiet ripple of laughter from neighbors who'd endured her tyranny for years and were now watching the crown slip from her head in real time. The officer raised his hand again, two others stepping in close, and his voice was final, undeniable. "Ma'am, you are under investigation for attempted theft of police property, criminal mischief, and obstruction. You will remain detained until further notice." He gestured, and within seconds, cuffs clicked around her wrists, her shrieks rising to a piercing wail. "No, this isn't happening. I was protecting the community. I was protecting property values. You can't arrest me in front of my neighbors." But the irony was perfect. Her entire empire of intimidation was crumbling in the exact place she had built it, her stage now turned against her, every porch light illuminating her disgrace. The silence that followed was almost worse than the Fezbay. Noise, neighbors whispering to each other in awe, phones raised higher, the cool authority of the officers standing like statues, Karen's frantic sobbing the only sound that filled the night. I took one last step closer, just enough for her to hear me as they guided her toward the waiting SUV, and I said softly, "The funny thing about power, Karen, it only works if people believe in it. Nobody here believes in yours anymore." She jerked her head toward me, eyes burning with hatred, but there was nothing she could do, no HOA bylaw, no threat of fines, no passive-aggressive letter that could save her from the truth now laid bare. The doors of the SUV opened, the lights flared brighter, and as they pushed her inside, the neighborhood erupted not in fear, but in a low growing murmur of satisfaction. Justice finally delivered not by vengeance, but by the very law she had tried to twist for her own ends, and as the SUVs pulled away, the Jeep sat quiet, steady, untouched, no longer just a symbol of defiance against Karen's HOA games, but a reminder that the law doesn't bend for arrogance, and that sometimes the greatest reveal isn't what you own, it's what the truth exposes. The next morning, the neighborhood didn't wake to birdsong or sprinklers, it woke to whispers, the kind that carry faster than wildfire in an HOA community where gossip is currency, and last night's spectacle had minted every witness. Rich beyond measure, Karen's house sat dark, curtains drawn tight as though she could hide from the shame now clinging to her name, but the street was alive with murmurs, neighbors leaning across fences, pointing toward her driveway, replaying the sight of her being shoved into the back of a police SUV. She finally got what she deserved, Mrs. Henderson whispered to her husband as they sipped coffee on their porch, and across the street, a group of teenagers replayed the videos they'd captured, laughing as Karen's shrieks echoed through their phones. The HOA board, once puffed up with self-importance, avoided eye contact altogether, walking briskly to their cars with shoulders hunched, as though afraid the stain of her downfall might spread onto them too. But there was no escaping the truth. The queen bee had been swatted down in front of her hive, and the humiliation was complete. By noon, word spread that the police had filed an official report charges of tampering with government property, criminal mischief, and obstruction, and even if the lawyers managed to soften the blow, the fact was undeniable. Karen's name was now attached to a record she'd never lived down. For a woman who prided herself on perfection, who wielded community standards like a weapon, there could be no deeper cut than being branded the very thing she claimed to protect against a lawbreaker. I stood on my porch, sipping my own coffee, watching the small shifts ripple through the block. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now offered nods, even hesitant smiles, as if last night had granted me an authority even Karen couldn't strip away. One man muttered as he walked by, "Guess the rules don't beat the law." After all, and I just smiled faintly, letting the words hang like truth carved into stone. The HOA's carefully manufactured image of control, of superiority, of their power being untouchable was cracked wide open. The minutes from their next meeting would show what the police had already made clear. Their reach stopped at the edge of their own arrogance. No gavel, no fine, no threat of liens could erase the fact that when Karen cut that lock, she hadn't been fighting me, she'd been fighting the law itself, and the law doesn't play HOA games. As the sun rose higher, police cruisers returned not for drama this time, but for paperwork, evidence, procedure. They photographed the broken lock still lying where Karen had dropped it, noted the scuff marks on the Jeep's handle, and spoke to neighbors who now eagerly lined up to give statements, each one adding another nail to the coffin of Karen's authority. I answered a few questions, kept my tone steady, professional, reminding myself of the badge I once carried and the code I still respected. Watching the officers work, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness, satisfaction that justice had been delivered, sadness that it had to come to this at all. If Karen had listened, if she'd understood that her HOA power wasn't bigger than the law, none of this would have happened. But arrogance rarely listens. It only collides with reality, and last night reality hit her harder than any fine or letter ever could. By evening, the entire neighborhood felt different. People sat out on porches longer than usual, conversations buzzing, laughter occasionally breaking out as they retold their favorite moments, Karen's face when the officer revealed the Jeep's true ownership, her shrill protests as the cuffs closed around her wrists, my calm line that had landed like a final nail. "I told you not to touch it, Karen." Someone joked about putting it on a t-shirt, and for once, the laughter wasn't nervous or hushed. It was free, communal, almost healing. The HOA, humiliated, canceled their upcoming board meeting, posting a weekly worded statement about unforeseen circumstances on the community bulletin. But everyone knew the truth. Their fortress of authority had collapsed. Not because of lawsuits or protests, but because their leader had been caught red-handed, trying to play queen over a game that was never hers to control. As I locked up for the night, I took one last glance at the Jeep. Its black frame sitting steady in my driveway, quiet and unassuming, yet carrying a weight no one could deny anymore. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol. Proof that the law stood taller than HOA politics. Proof that sometimes silence and patience are more powerful than shouting matches. And as the cicadas started their evening chorus, I let the thought settle in, steady and certain. Some people believe HOA power is bigger than the law. Last night, Karen learned the hard way it's not. The street was quiet now. The sirens and chaos of last night replaced by the soft hum of morning, the way a neighborhood always seems to breathe easier after a storm has passed, and there I was, sitting on the tailgate of my Jeep, the black steel gleaming faintly under the early sun, a mug of coffee warming my hands, the steam curling lazily into the crisp air as I watched Oak Ridge Drive slowly come back to life. The flowers on Mrs. Henderson's porch were upright again, sprinklers hummed faintly in the distance, and the neighbors emerged cautiously from their homes, still murmuring about what they'd witnessed, still glancing toward the driveway as if checking to make sure reality had really returned to its proper order. I took a slow sip, savoring both the bitter warmth of the coffee and the bitter irony of the entire situation. Karen, who had strutted around like a queen of the cul-de-sac, gavel in hand, convinced that rules, bylaws, and petty HOA authority could bend the world to her whims, had discovered in the harshest, most public way that the law outweighs ego, and that nothing she could write on letterhead or force with a snappy photograph could compare to the weight of real authority. The bolt cutters she'd wielded like a weapon of control lay discarded in police evidence now, a reminder of how arrogance blinds even the most self-assured, how the illusion of power can collapse in seconds, and how one's obsession with controlling neighbors can lead to the most spectacularly public downfall imaginable. I watched a few kids ride bikes down the cul-de-sac, waving to me as they passed, unaware of the full story but sensing that something monumental had shifted. The neighbors' whispered gossip continued, half in relief, half in awe, as they replayed the events in their minds, the audacity of Karen cutting the lock, the surreal flash of lights and sirens, the moment when the officers revealed the Jeep's true status, and the undeniable fact that her little kingdom had been undone by her own blind hubris. I set my coffee down on the tailgate and ran a hand along the smooth metal, thinking about how often people mistake control over property, over committees, over minor disputes for actual authority, and how easily they forget that some rules exist beyond personal ambition, beyond petty grudges, beyond HOA newsletters. Some battles are bigger than lawns, bigger than letterhead, bigger than threats of fines. Some battles are governed by law, by order, by the kind of structured authority that doesn't care about personal titles or imagined supremacy. A gentle breeze stirred the trees, ruffling the leaves, and I let the quiet settle around me, thinking about Karen one last time, about the smugness she wore like armor, and about the harsh lesson she'd learned in the span of one chaotic night. You can fight your neighbors, you can fight petty rules, you can rage against opinions and authority within a cul-de-sac, but never fight the law. Especially not with bolt cutters. I chuckled softly, shaking my head at the absurdity, at the almost cinematic perfection of it all, and took another sip of coffee, the morning sun reflecting off the Jeep's glossy black hood, a subtle reminder that patience, calm, and respect for the rules that truly matter will always prevail over ego, over aggression, over the kind of self-important rage that blinds people to reality. The street grew quieter still as neighbors returned to their routines. Some glancing back with tentative smiles, some whispering to one another in relief that balance had been restored. And I realized that in the end, this wasn't just a story about a Jeep, an HOA president, or a single night of chaos. It was a story about the fragile nature of perceived power, about patience and restraint, about how sometimes the best way to win is to let the law handle the fools who think rules don't apply to them. I leaned back against the tailgate, coffee in hand, watching the light grow brighter over the rooftops, letting the relief and quiet satisfaction wash over me, knowing that Oak Ridge Drive could finally breathe again, that my Jeep would sit safely in my driveway, and that the lesson Karen had learned would ripple through the cul-de-sac for years to come. And as the camera would pull back in a cinematic fade, the street glowing warmly in early morning light, the Jeep steadfast in the driveway, the neighborhood slowly waking to an ordinary day after extraordinary chaos, I whispered to myself, a dry, wry smile tugging at my lips. Some people think HOA power is bigger than the law. Tonight, Karen learned the hard way. You can fight your neighbors, but never fight the law, especially not with bolt cutters. The scene faded, the hum of the morning rising, and everything settled into quiet triumph, a perfect, ironic end to a suburban drama that would be remembered long after the street returned to its mundane routine.